I'm Brenna, and I'm a crime prevention specialist with the Menomonie Police Department.
I'm Kat, and I'm the sexual assault victim advocate and UW Stout campus advocate at the Bridge to Hope.
I am Angie. I'm the director of sexual assault victim services at the Bridge to Hope.
And I'm Kelly. I am a patrol lieutenant that works the night shift at the Menomonie Police Department.
And this is Bridging the Gap. So after we collaborated on our human trafficking PSA videos, we realized that there was a real opportunity for us to continue with our shared goal of educating the community and ourselves and furthering a partnership between our agencies. So to many, it may seem like our agencies don't have anything in common. A law enforcement entity and a nonprofit organization serving victims of domestic abuse and sexual assault and getting them support that they need. But really, when you look at the mission of both agencies, we're not that different. The mission of the Bridge to Hope is to empower individuals, families, and communities through advocacy, education, and collaboration. And the mission of the Menomonie Police Department is to collaborate with the community to provide a safe and peaceful environment while protecting the liberties of all persons. The phrase bridge the gap means to connect two things or make the difference between them smaller. And in this instance, that couldn't be more true. So we're coming together to discuss some pertinent topics with the goal of helping the community, increasing collaboration, and promoting safety. So thanks for joining.
Today, we're here to talk about Women's History Month, which began in 1978 in Sonoma, California, as a week-long celebration of women and their contributions to history and society. In the following years, this idea caught on and spread to other communities throughout the nation. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter became the first president to declare National Women Histories Week during March 8th. The next year, Congress passed a resolution for the week-long celebration of women, and 6 years later, after the efforts by the Women's History Projects, Congress expanded the celebration to the entire month of March.
So we recognize Women's History Month to teach what women have done and to help inspire women to fulfill their true potential. Women were at the forefront of the gender-based violence, domestic violence, and sexual prevention movements and continue to lead the way to a world without violence.
So the history of women in law enforcement really dates back to the late 1800s in the territorial West, when a number of women assisted their husbands, who would be sheriffs at that point in the counties, in an unofficial capacity, but some did have some arrest powers. But really, when you talk about women in policing and their history, you're looking at the municipal level, and women in this, even at the larger state and federal levels at that time, were very few and far between. So women were found in these municipal agencies more towards the late 1890s, early 1900s. A lot of them were appointed to be matrons, so they would work and care for women and children who were in police custody, and they wouldn't have arrest authority. So that would be kind of the extent of their duties. But as time went on, more and more women wanted to join the police force and wanted to have arrest powers. But a lot of them didn't necessarily see themselves as crime fighters, but looked at themselves as a member of like social and protective services. So an example of this is a lady by the name of Lola Baldwin, who in 1908 was the first sworn female police officer. She was hired by Portland, Oregon. And she was actually a social worker who was hired to patrol the streets in plain clothes, so she wasn't in uniform, to assure that women were safe at a large event that was sort of the equivalent of like a World's Fair type scenario. So she set the standard of police women initially being assigned to work in plain clothes, but look into areas where men and women might congregate, and where alcohol might be involved, promiscuous behavior might be involved at that time, and just make sure that people were safe. So a lot of those places would be like dance halls or pool rooms, train stations, entertainment areas, sometimes even movie theaters. Alice Stebbins Wells is another woman around that time, in roughly about 1910, who was appointed to the Los Angeles Police Department. A lot of times she's referred to as the first woman with arrest authority, but that's not the case. It was Lola a couple years before her. But she did found the International Association of Police Women, which is a group that lobbied pretty extensively in the United States and Canada for the employment of women in policing. Some other notable women in the early 1900s were Georgia Ann Robinson. She was appointed by the Los Angeles Police Department. She was America's first known African-American policewoman. And that was in 1916. In 1920, Myrtle Seiler was elected sheriff in Pittsboro, North Carolina. And in 1946, Josephine Serrano also joined the Los Angeles Police Department, becoming the first known Latina policewoman.
Fast forward to the 1960s. In 1961, two New York City policewomen, Felicia Spritzer and Gertrude Schimmel, sued the New York Police Department for the right to take the promotional exam for sergeant. In 1964, they and a small number of other women took and passed a court-ordered exam. They were the first two women promoted, and in 1967, after additional litigation and another makeup exam, they became the first two female police lieutenants. All right, now into the 1970s. In 1972, Congress passed an amendment to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, prohibiting state and local agencies from job discrimination based on gender. Police departments were required to hire women for jobs on an equal basis with men. In 1974, Menomonie hired its first sworn woman police officer.
The battered women's movement of the 1970s is a huge piece of women's history in the United States. Prior to the 70s, the great need for domestic violence-related advocacy services was not at the forefront of the community conversations or legislative agendas. Domestic violence, or domestic battery as it was previously referred to, was considered kind of a taboo topic, and it wasn't discussed outside of one's home. In fact, prior to the 70s, shelter services for victims of domestic violence were non-existent. At the time, domestic violence, a prevalent and deep-rooted issue in society, was affecting millions and millions of households each year. In many cases, women did not have the support systems or services or options in place to seek the help that they needed for themselves and their children in the aftermath of abuse.
Finally, in 1974, the country's first documented women's shelter opened, providing critical safety and options for battered and abused women. It was just really the beginning, though. By the end of the 70s, there were about 250 shelters for abused women across the nation. Today, there are several thousand domestic violence organizations throughout the United States, with many offering shelter services. As the years have went on, so have the advances to the battered women's movement, including improved medical and legal responses to domestic violence, the development of protocols, improved legislation, and further protection for all victims. And also, as time has gone on, we've really moved away from the battered women's movement and really worked towards domestic violence services. It always feels kind of icky when we hear battered women. So that's also something that we've been working on throughout those years.
In 1980, the state of Wisconsin gave the West Cap Agency in Glenwood City funds to assist victims of domestic violence in 8 Wisconsin counties. In 1982, West Central Domestic Abuse broke away from West Cap and became an entity of its own, receiving nonprofit funding from the federal and state government. West Central's first office was located in the back of a local implement dealer in Menomonie. West Central provided services to 37 women the first year of operation.
So in 1982, a group of concerned citizens realized the impact that domestic abuse was having on the families in our community and wanted to offer some kind of services and help. Legal assistance was the first services offered to victims, and volunteers often housed escaping families in their own homes, which could be extremely dangerous. Over the years, the agency grew and our name changed to the Bridge to Hope. In 1998, we moved into our old location, which was located off of South Broadway. The top floor was turned into an emergency shelter with 3 rooms available for victims escaping abuse, and services were expanded to include advocacy and help for victims of sexual assault and human trafficking, as well as domestic abuse. In 2017, we were very fortunate and we were able to purchase our current location, which is off of 4th Avenue, right behind the hospital here in Menomonie, which expanded our emergency shelter to house more victims, along with allowing each advocate to finally have their own offices for better privacy, a bigger food pantry, and a larger meeting area for all of our different support groups.
In 1986, West Central added the children's program and began providing services to children who had experienced and or witnessed physical, sexual, emotional, or domestic abuse. The Crime Victim Witness Program was also added to the services provided by West Central. And then in 1990, West Central joined with the Dunn County District Attorney's Office to provide services to all victims of crime.
The board of directors of West Central Domestic Abuse Agency changed the organization's name to the Bridge to Hope, Inc., effective January 1st, 1996. Services are now provided in both Dunn and Pepin counties.
So in 1990, Gail Everts became the first female officer at the Menomonie Police Department to hold rank when she was promoted to the role of sergeant. She was also the department's first female lieutenant, being promoted to that role in 1996. Wendy Stelter closely followed suit by becoming a sergeant in 1998 and lieutenant in 2002. Both of these women were my mentors as I was hired at the Menomonie Police Department and starting out.
Our organization thrives because of the hard work and dedication of the courageous, empowering women at the head of the movement. All 9 of our full-time staff members, including our executive director and 5 of our crisis staff members who answer emergency calls and maintain our shelter on nights, weekends, and holidays, are all passionate and hardworking women.
We also believe that it's important to elevate the voices of Black, Indigenous people of color, particularly women in those communities and women belonging to other marginalized communities who are most impacted by high rates of violence, and to bring their influence to the forefront of this movement. To name a few of these people who are at the forefront of this movement, people of color who have made big impacts in their lifetime. Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, who were prominent figures in the Stonewall riots and advocates for the LGBTQIA+ community. Maya Angelou, whose writing remains a powerful demonstration of the impacts of racism and sexual assault. Angela Davis is another very recognizable name in the feminist, anti-racist, and anti-violence movements. Her work lives on today. And Coretta Scott King, who was committed to civil rights movements, both in the 60s and beyond. Jane Bolin was the first Black woman to graduate from Yale Law School, and she was also the nation's first Black woman judge in 1939. And Tarana Burke, who more recently founded the Me Too movement in 2006, that has brought issues of sexual assault to the spotlight and been talked about widely over social media and in our communities, and really brought attention to this issue that might otherwise be swept under the rug.
According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the national average for sworn women police officers in county and city departments is approximately about 13% of all officers. Here in Menomonie, out of our 27 sworn capacity, we have 5 sworn female police officers, making up approximately 19% of our sworn staff.
So I was hired at the Menomonie Police Department in 2006. When I started, I was the lone female patrol officer in the department. Lieutenant Everts and Lieutenant Stelter were 2 of my supervisors at the time who mentored me along the way. And from what I had learned is that prior to them, there really wasn't a lot of interaction with a female patrol officer. There is a lot of concerns, I think, with the male officers about what my abilities were, if I would be able to handle the job, if I would be able to stick it out, if they said something to hurt my feelings, was I going to cry? I got my first issued clothing, which was all men's clothing. I was also told that this was a step up, though, from what they had issued people in the past. So I was just grateful that somebody was providing me with clothing at the time. But clearly the men's pants did not fit me in a way that females' pants would fit me, which would require some modifications and alterations. Some of the other struggles I've gone through the year, which I think, looking back, they're really petty compared to what other women have struggled through. And most of them are related to uniforms. I've been, told that they're going to order me a new vest and they want to order a men's vest. Well, men's vests fit differently on women. I've also, one problem in the women's community of law enforcement is you find an item such as a pair of boots or a pair of pants that you're like, these are it. They fit, they're great. The next time you go to order, they're gone, they're discontinued. At times I've, out on the street, which this has nothing to do whatsoever with people I work with. because they've always been super supportive of me, and they've always guided me and helped me grow. But the people on the street have a tendency to talk to women officers and try to call them sweetie, honey, baby. They, try to almost talk down to you, sometimes turn to a male officer to choose to talk to him instead of you when it's your call, because they think they're going to get further with a male officer. I've learned different ways throughout the years to kind of deal with that. As far as, the growth here, I felt, it took me a longer time because I was a new woman here where there wasn't a lot of women to kind of mesh in with some of the other guys and be accepted. Once they accepted me and, they realized that I'm capable of doing my job, a lot of it surrounded by our own trust. Things became easy for me in that aspect because I meshed in well with the other guys and I was able to do my job and show them that I'm able to fit in. But since then, we've hired many other women. I honestly never thought that we would see 5 women working at our department. I'm not going to lie. And the dynamics amongst the women that I work with are great. We all get along really well. We all work really well together. We support each other. Not only do we work well with the women within our own department, but there are other women in other agencies that I've worked with that have supported me and helped guide me. Sergeant Lisa Peterson with the UW Stout Police Department. I have worked with her a long time. When I started in law enforcement, I was also a reserve at the Dunn County Sheriff's Office, and she was actually my supervisor in the reserve program at that time. And now I've worked with her for many years through UW Stout as well, and forged friendships with a lot of these women. We've been able to support each other and to give each other advice. As a woman, one of the larger struggles I think I had is because there weren't any women at this police department that were in patrol, and there were not any that became pregnant or had children. I was the first one to have children. So I kind of set some standards for how we were going to do light duty and what I was or wasn't able to do. And I remember when I found out that I was going to have children and I was pregnant, the male officers were always very attentive and worried about me if I was going to calls. They wanted to make sure that I was safe, that the baby was safe, that nothing was going to happen. Also, once you have that baby, there's the dynamics of balancing your work and home life. Yes, dads and male officers have the same thing with balancing work and home life, but it's a little different for the mom when she's actually given birth and she has maybe different expectations, such as feedings for the baby, depending on how you choose to feed your baby. And it was an interesting way to learn to balance my life. And then you run into people who don't think you should stay in a career field like law enforcement. Once you have children, they feel it's dangerous and maybe you shouldn't be there. Or they feel that, you should be at home raising your kids. I love my children and my family, but I also love my career, my job. And I don't feel that I need to give up my job to be a good mother either. I think I can do both. And when people choose to do that, that's what's right for their family, but this is what's right for mine. So there's been lots of things over the years. I've had just as many opportunities as any of the male officers have here. I've been very fortunate to work in a really great department that has a group of people who are equally supportive of each other no matter what. Men, women, whatever your choices are, whatever your preferences in life are, we've supported each other. We're here. We work with each other. I don't have to worry about those kinds of things. And I've had a very supportive, command staff. Our chief is a huge advocate of not only women's rights and domestic violence support and supporting people in sexual assault, supporting people who are in different communities. He has given me all the opportunities that I've had, just as much as he's given any of the male officers. He definitely takes it and he looks at it, merit and abilities and who is most suited for different positions. And it does nothing to do with whether you're a girl or a boy, or if you have certain sexual preferences, or if you identify as, the transgender community or anything else. Our chief is very open to anyone who is capable of doing this job and doing a good job. We support, and I've always had that support here, which has been great for me.
We are very fortunate at the Bridge that our board and our director really support us in that. When we have kids, we can actually bring our babies to work for the first year or until they're crawling. We can, even my teenagers come to work with me some days and help or volunteer or just hang out with us. And even we've had staff members who still are breastfeeding that sit and are able to pump in their offices with no problems. And we've been able to, if we have to leave at the drop of a hat to be with our kids or our families, we're really 100% supported by that. And that's really been reassuring. There's a lot of agencies in our community that aren't as open and respectful for moms or dads for that matter. But I've felt very fortunate to be able to work here and not have to make that choice between my family and my career. I feel like my career has made me a better mother, and my kids would say the same thing. They fully support my choice to be an advocate. And I think that they wouldn't like me as much if I was home all the time.
Oh my God. But I think it's actually probably encouraged your kids to grow and to seek out experiences and to do the things that they want and to have goals. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And we'd like to thank all the women that have forged the way for the rest of us so far. And we continue to forge the way for the women coming up behind us. Who are women that are influential that you know of in your life that maybe have guided you? Please feel free to comment below for us. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.